Growing up in America, I always felt like the odd piece in a family puzzle that never quite fit together. Our house in Connecticut was a grand old colonial with white columns that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky, and lawns so carefully manicured that not even a single dandelion dared to show its yellow face. Outsiders would see our home and think of comfort and tradition, but within those walls, kindness was more a ghost than a guest. I spent much of my childhood on the periphery, watching, listening, quietly wishing for a softness that rarely arrived. My father, Charles Rutherford, was a man who loved order and applause, while my mother, Diane, held herself together with little more than pearls and patience. My brother, James, spent most of his days trying to avoid conflict, becoming an expert in blending into wallpaper. The night of my parents' anniversary party was supposed to be different. There was talk of celebration, of togetherness, and of making up for the cracks that had long run through our foundation. I knew, in my heart, it would be just another performance, but hope is a stubborn thing. I was running late that night, delayed by an endless board meeting in Miami and traffic on I-95 that crawled like molasses. As my driver turned onto the long, winding drive, I could see the house lit up in the dark, every window glowing like an invitation I wasn't sure I wanted to accept. I stepped out, my heels crunching on the gravel, the humid air pressing against my skin. Even before I reached the door, I could hear the laughter, too loud, too forced, and the clinking of crystal glasses. I took a deep breath, bracing myself, and walked in. As soon as I entered the foyer, the eyes of nearly everyone in the dining room turned to me. They tried to hide their stares, but their gazes felt like spotlights. Dad stood at the head of the table, already several glasses of expensive French wine deep. His laughter boomed, echoing off the high ceilings and down the halls. The dining room was filled with relatives, neighbors, and business partners, all dressed to the nines. My sister-in-law, Alice, was carrying little Henry on her hip, trying to calm him while picking up a plate that had shattered on the floor. The room, already charged with nervous energy, tensed even more as my father's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Stop holding your child and clean this up," Dad shouted, pointing at Alice with a tone that turned her cheeks bright red. Everyone in the room froze for a split second, and then, because nobody wanted to be the odd one out, a few people started to laugh. Some laughter was awkward, some was nervous, but all of it felt wrong. It wasn't funny. It never was. I could feel my jaw tighten as I watched Alice struggle to balance Henry and clean the mess. My mother sat at the other end of the table, eyes fixed on her plate, as if pretending not to notice would make the moment disappear. James, always the peacemaker, tried to distract our father with a comment about the wine, but Dad brushed him off with a wave. As I took a few steps into the dining room, my father's attention snapped to me. He narrowed his eyes, noticing my late arrival, and the whole room seemed to hush, the laughter dying out. "Well, look who decided to join us," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. I tried to keep my expression calm, reminding myself to breathe. I looked at my mother, searching for a flicker of support, but she wouldn't meet my gaze. I walked past the sideboard and set my purse on a chair. The air was heavy with the scent of roast beef, candles, and tension. My father cleared his throat loudly, wanting to make sure he had everyone's attention, as if the party itself was another one of his corporate presentations. "No more excuses tonight," Dad said, his voice growing louder. "Are you going to help or what?" He pointed again, this time at me, as if daring me to say no. I could see some of the guests shift in their seats, discomfort flickering across their faces. I wondered how many of them had stories like mine, moments when they were forced to choose between their dignity and family peace. My hand trembled slightly as I set down my keys, but my voice was steady when I replied, no, there was nothing more to say. I wasn't going to clean up his messes anymore, literally or figuratively. My father's face turned crimson, his eyes narrowed to slits. "Then get out," he roared, his voice echoing up the stairs and down the halls. The shockwave of his anger rippled through the room, silencing any last nervous giggles. I looked around the room one last time. My mother kept her head down, the pearls at her throat trembling ever so slightly. James looked at me, a silent apology written all over his face. I could see, for the briefest moment, the pain in his eyes, a pain that mirrored my own. Alice was still crouched on the floor, tears threatening to spill, clutching Henry close. Without another word, I straightened my spine and walked out. My heels clicked on the marble floor, each step a statement. I didn't slam the door or raise my voice. I didn't look back. I left them with their party, their laughter, their ignorance. As I walked out into the cool Connecticut night, the stars above the old house seemed almost indifferent. The wind carried the distant sounds of the party, a world I was no longer part of, a world that had never truly been mine. What no one inside that house realized, not my father with his barking orders or my mother with her averted gaze, was that their world was built on something I controlled. They lived in my empire, a fortune worth $147 million, and all of it could disappear as quickly as I could snap my fingers. That night, as I got into my car and asked my driver to take me back to Miami, I knew everything had changed. I had let them take my silence for weakness for far too long. Tomorrow, they would learn what it meant to lose their comfort, their certainty, and maybe, just maybe, they'd finally realize that the outsider was the only one holding everything together. The next morning, Miami was painted in soft shades of gold and rose. I stood barefoot on the balcony of my villa, overlooking Biscayne Bay, letting the salt-tinged air fill my lungs. From here, the world looked vast and promising, a world where I could finally breathe. The glass walls behind me caught the early light, scattering it across marble floors, over sculptures and paintings I'd collected in travels through Europe, Venice, Paris, London. Downstairs, the gentle hum of the housekeeper making coffee was the only sound. For the first time in years, I felt entirely awake, entirely myself. My phone was heavy in my hand. I scrolled through messages, reminders from the estate manager, congratulatory texts from friends, a few work emails from the investment firm I'd built from the ground up. But none of that mattered in this moment. There was something that needed to be set in motion, a line I needed to cross to finally close the chapter on everything Connecticut had ever meant to me. I found Stephen's number in my favorites. My lawyer had always been efficient and discreet, and after last night, I knew I could trust him not to question my resolve. He picked up on the second ring, his British accent still crisp despite years in Florida. "Good morning, Isabel," he said, sounding both curious and prepared. "Is everything all right?" I watched a seagull dive into the sparkling bay. "It's time, Stephen. Sell everything. The house in Connecticut, the farm in Vermont, the apartments in Chicago. Put it all on the market. No exceptions." There was the briefest pause, just long enough for me to imagine his eyebrows rising. "Understood," he said, businesslike as always. "I'll get started immediately. Would you like me to inform the family?" A coldness crept into my voice.
No.
"They'll find out soon enough. Make sure the paperwork is perfect. I don't want any loopholes, no chance for anyone to contest." He cleared his throat gently. "I'll be thorough, as always." I ended the call and set the phone on the balcony railing, staring out at the city that had become my sanctuary. In that moment, I realized how small the rest of the world had become to me. All those years I'd spent trying to prove my worth in the house I'd just walked away from, holding my tongue, pretending to be at peace, I could finally let it all go. I wandered through my villa, the smooth, cool tile under my feet a reminder of just how far I'd come from my childhood in Connecticut. The living room was flooded with sunlight, lighting up the abstract canvases I'd found in a Parisian gallery. Each one was a piece of a different story, a wild night in Barcelona, a rainy afternoon in London, a silent morning on the coast of Portugal. These rooms, with their floor-to-ceiling windows and subtle, European-inspired decor, felt alive in a way the Connecticut house never did. I paused at the glass dining table, running my hand over the crystal bowl in its center. It had belonged to my grandmother, a woman of quiet strength who had survived more than I would ever know. I thought of her often, especially in moments like this, and wondered what she would think of the path I'd taken. Would she understand my need to cut loose, To finally choose myself over obligation? By noon, the phone started ringing. First, my brother James. I let it ring. I could imagine him pacing the hallway in Connecticut, voice tight with confusion or regret. Maybe both. I didn't want to hear apologies or explanations. I was done carrying the weight of everyone else's comfort. Next came my mother. She left a voicemail, her voice soft, a little shaky, as if she were rehearsing for an audience that never arrived. Isabel, darling, I hope you got home safely. We missed you after you left last night. Your father was just, well, he was upset. Please call me when you can. I deleted the message. I couldn't let myself be pulled back in. Finally, my father called. He didn't leave a message. I pictured him in his study, fuming, running a hand through his thinning hair, demanding answers from anyone who would listen. It struck me how little I cared. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to apologize for my absence or soften the blow of my decisions. I felt only relief. I turned off my phone and walked out to the pool deck, sunlight shimmering on the turquoise water. The sky above Miami was a wide expanse, unbroken by anything but the occasional wispy cloud. I let my robe fall to the chaise lounge and slipped into the water, the coolness closing over me like a promise. With every stroke, I left behind another piece of the life I'd just severed. After swimming, I lay on my back, floating, letting the sun warm my face. I closed my eyes and thought about what freedom meant. It wasn't about the money, not really. My empire had always been a tool, a way to build the independence I craved. It meant being able to choose who I kept in my life, where I spent my days, and what kind of future I wanted to shape. It meant I could support the arts, fund scholarships for girls with dreams as big as mine once were, and buy time for myself in the form of quiet mornings and long, luxurious afternoons. As the day stretched on, I wandered through my gardens, listening to the sound of palm leaves rattling in the breeze. I thought about all the years I'd spent trapped in old expectations, about how many times I'd been told to be quieter, nicer, less ambitious. All those voices belonged to a life I'd finally left behind. That afternoon, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and watched the city shimmer in the heat, its towers sparkling in the distance. Miami was full of life, music drifting from open windows, laughter from boats on the bay, the ever-present possibility of reinvention. Here, no one cared about my last name, my family history, or the things I'd chosen to walk away from. Here, I was just Isabel, a woman with a villa, a vision, and finally, the freedom to live exactly as she pleased. I knew my decision would send shockwaves through my family, that the coming days would be filled with angry calls and frantic emails. But for now, the silence was golden. For now, I could savor the sweetness of a new beginning, built entirely on my terms. After the dust settled from my decision to sell everything in Connecticut, Miami truly became my sanctuary. The transition wasn't immediate, of course. Even as my lawyer, Stephen, handled the sales and finalized the transactions, there was a kind of emotional debris that lingered. I felt it in the quiet hours of the morning when the sun would rise pink and gold over Biscayne Bay, and in the evenings when the city lights glittered like scattered diamonds. But slowly, the sting of the past faded, replaced by the excitement of creating something entirely my own. My first few weeks in Miami were a blur of rediscovery. I wandered the Art Deco streets of South Beach, letting myself get lost in the color and noise. I ate at little cafes tucked away on side streets, places where nobody knew my name or my story. It was liberating to be anonymous, to shed the expectations of the Rutherford family and simply exist as Isabel. One afternoon, as I strolled through Wynwood, I met Sarah. She was leaning against the wall of her art gallery, her wild curls haloed by the afternoon sun, clipboard in hand, checking off a list of deliveries. "You look like you could use a friend," she called out with a mischievous grin. I laughed, surprised at her openness, and before I knew it, I was inside her gallery, surrounded by canvases bursting with color and energy. Sarah introduced me to a world I'd always admired from a distance. She knew every artist in Miami, could talk for hours about the meaning of a brushstroke, and never apologized for her passion. We became fast friends. Friday nights were spent sipping wine and talking art, and on Saturdays, we'd walk the neighborhoods, hunting for new murals. She was the first person in years who wanted to know me, not my bank account or my family legacy. Through Sarah, I met Liam, a sailing instructor with sun-bleached hair and an easy laugh. He taught me how to navigate Biscayne Bay, guiding me through shallow waters and into the open blue. "Let the wind carry you," he'd say, grinning as he handed me the tiller. With him, I learned to trust myself in new ways. On the water, everything else faded. No family drama, no regrets, just the rhythm of the waves and the freedom of the horizon. Inspired by my new friendships, I started investing my time and money into things that mattered to me. I donated to local charities, women's shelters, youth programs, and arts initiatives. For years, I'd watched my family write checks for social clout, but I wanted to see the impact with my own eyes. I met young women who reminded me of myself, ambitious, underestimated, determined to build their futures. Their stories moved me, and soon I was funding scholarships for girls across Miami, giving them the chance to chase dreams no one thought possible. One morning, while wandering downtown, I passed a little cafe with chipped blue paint and a crooked sign that read Sunny's. The owner, a woman in her 60s named Gloria, was struggling to keep the doors open. Something about the place tugged at my heart, a warmth and resilience that felt familiar. After a long conversation over coffee and homemade muffins, I decided to buy the cafe. I kept Gloria on as manager, hired local women for the kitchen, and together, we turned Sunny's into a gathering spot for the neighborhood. It was a place where people belonged, no matter where they came from. For the first time, I felt what it meant to build something meaningful and lasting. Of course, the past never disappears entirely. Now and then, someone from Connecticut would try to break through my new life. James, my brother, wrote long, rambling emails filled with apologies and explanations. Dad was always so angry. He confessed in one message, "It's different now. We miss you. I miss you." For a while, I would read his words late at night, feeling a pang of nostalgia or guilt. But I knew better than to go back. My father's temper and my mother's silence were chains I'd broken for a reason. Sometimes, the only way to heal is to walk away. My mother tried to reach out, too, in her way, postcards from her new apartment in Boston, awkward Christmas cards with carefully scripted notes. I appreciated the gestures, but there was no way to undo years of pretending and pain. I sent polite replies, wishing her well, but never promising more than that. Even at a distance, I had to protect the peace I'd worked so hard to build. My empire was no longer about numbers in a bank account or properties on a spreadsheet. It was about choice. I became obsessed with learning how to manage my portfolio, taking online courses in finance, reading thick books about investments, and sitting down with advisors who spoke to me as an equal. I put money into startups, tech companies in San Francisco, eco-friendly brands in London, and a new line of organic skincare in Paris. Each investment felt like planting a seed, not just for profit, but for possibility. Travel became part of my rhythm. I'd hop a flight to Paris to visit a friend opening a new boutique, or spend a week in London attending gallery shows. Each trip reminded me of the world's size and variety. But I always returned to Miami, to the villa that overlooked the bay, to Sarah's laughter and Liam's sailing lessons, to Sunny's cafe and the friendships I'd nurtured. Home was no longer a place of inherited memories. It was a sanctuary I'd made for myself, filled with joy and belonging. There were quiet days, too, afternoons spent reading on the balcony, mornings when I'd linger over breakfast and the crossword. Sometimes, I'd look back and marvel at how different my life had become. I wasn't the scared, silent girl from Connecticut anymore. I was a woman who chose her path, who dared to leave and the strength to build anew. In those moments, I felt a peace I'd never known. My days were filled with purpose, laughter shared with friends, hands-on work in the community, nights spent dreaming up new adventures. Miami had given me more than freedom. It had given me myself. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would never look back. A year had passed since I walked out of my parents' anniversary party in Connecticut, and sometimes, When I thought back to that night, it felt like watching a film of someone else's life. The woman who tiptoed around other people's moods and held her breath at family dinners was gone. I could see her, but she didn't belong to me anymore. In her place stood a version of myself I never could have imagined, a woman grounded, content, and undeniably free. It was New Year's Eve in Miami, and my villa was alive with energy and laughter. The air was warm, tinged with the faintest ocean breeze. Through the open glass doors, I could hear the music spilling out onto the terrace, the low hum of conversation blending with the distant sound of waves breaking on the shore. I stood on the balcony, Sarah and Liam on either side of me, as we watched the first bursts of fireworks bloom over the city. Sarah, glass of champagne in hand, grinned at me, her cheeks flushed with happiness. "Can you believe it?" she said, gesturing toward the bay, where the sky was turning gold and silver. "1 year ago, you were running from your past. And now look at you." Liam nodded, leaning on the railing. "You built a new life, Isabel. I hope you're proud of yourself." "We are." I smiled, but it wasn't the brittle smile I used to wear, the one meant to hide discomfort or smooth over tension. This one was genuine, soft, the kind that came from deep within. "I am proud," I admitted, the words feeling like a kind of magic on my tongue. "And grateful. For all of this, for both of you. For this city, for this new beginning." As the clock inched closer to midnight, the memories came rushing in, uninvited but not unwelcome. I remembered the night I left Connecticut, how final it had felt to shut the door behind me, how heavy my heart had been. The fear, the doubts, the endless questions about whether I was doing the right thing. And then, slowly, the relief grew as the distance between me and my old life widened. The months that followed were a mixture of chaos and calm. There were moments when I worried about my family, about whether they'd be able to handle the changes, whether I'd regret cutting those ties. But as time went on, I realized that what I missed wasn't them, exactly. It was the idea of family I'd carried with me all those years, the hope that they might someday accept me as I was, the longing for a kind of love they simply couldn't give. Selling the properties had been surprisingly easy. Stephen had managed every detail with precision and tact. The Connecticut house sold first, then the farm in Vermont, then the apartments in Chicago. Each transaction felt like closing a chapter, as if the past was slowly being boxed up and sent away. My family, at first, was furious. My father left angry voicemails, demanding explanations. My mother wrote letters that grew more desperate, then resigned. James, for all his efforts to stay neutral, finally accepted that I was determined to live life on my terms. They moved out, each to their own smaller homes. For the first time, they had to confront their limitations, their own lives. We kept in touch, occasional calls, polite messages on birthdays and holidays, but the intimacy was gone. It was as though a fog had lifted, revealing a landscape that was stark but honest. I didn't mourn what we'd lost. Instead, I celebrated what I'd found. In Miami, my days were rich with meaning. I poured my energy into Sunny's Cafe, working with Gloria to expand our menu, support local artists, and create a community space where everyone felt welcome. The scholarships I'd funded began to bear fruit. I got letters from young women who were thriving at university, launching their businesses, finding their voices. Sarah's gallery flourished, too, and I was there for every opening, proud to support her dream. Liam and I spent countless afternoons on the bay, sailing beneath the endless sky. On the water, I felt most alive, unencumbered, daring, full of possibility. He taught me to read the wind, to trust my instincts, to let go of things I couldn't control. We became close, and in time, our friendship deepened into something more, a gentle, steady kind of love, rooted in respect and laughter. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to prove myself to anyone. I was enough. Sometimes people would ask me about my story, how I'd built my empire, why I'd left my family, what it felt like to start over. At first, I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But with each retelling, the shame faded. I stopped apologizing for my choices. I told the truth. I chose happiness over history. I chose myself, and I had no regrets. There were still difficult days, of course. Sometimes, in the quiet of the early morning, a pang of sadness would catch me off guard. I'd think about my childhood, about what could have been different, about the love I'd always wanted. But those moments were brief, softened by the life I'd created and the people who filled it with light. As midnight struck and the fireworks painted the sky in brilliant colors, I closed my eyes and made a wish. Not for more money or success, but for continued courage. The courage to keep choosing myself, day after day, to keep opening new doors, to keep walking away from anything that didn't serve my joy. I looked around at my friends, at my home, at the city that had welcomed me as I was, and I felt something settle inside me. Not the old ache of longing, but a quiet, profound peace. I had spent so many years chasing approval, trying to fit into a story that wasn't mine. Now I was writing my own, and every sunrise over the bay reminded me, sometimes walking away is the beginning of everything.